What if I told you the sound of rock as you know it, from Led Zeppelin to Hendrix to Metallica, traces back to just three men who only lasted 2 years? Before the world heard thunderous guitar solos, arena-sized jams, or the power of the trio, there was Cream. They didn't just make songs, they changed what a band could be. But behind every revolution is friction. Three musical geniuses, one stage, and egos big enough to fill the Royal Albert Hall. Their sound was explosive, and so was their downfall. How did three men, who could barely stand each other, create a sound that still echoes through rock's DNA? From smoky London clubs to psychedelic America, they pushed boundaries no one had dared to cross, blending blues, jazz, and raw electric fire into something entirely new. And just as the world crowned them kings, they walked away. In 1965, the British music scene was shifting like tectonic plates under the surface of pop culture. The Beatles were everywhere, the Rolling Stones were ruling radio, and London was buzzing with optimism, a city that had clawed its way out of post-war grey and into swinging color. But under all that glamour, in the basements and backrooms of smoky clubs, another sound was rising. It wasn't polished, it wasn't polite. It was loud, dirty, and deeply emotional. It was the blues. At that time, radio playlists were still safe. Bubblegum pop, novelty songs, clean harmonies, the kind of music that smiled but never bled. Meanwhile, across town, in the heart of Soho, and down at the Marquee Club, musicians were playing something very different. The blues was the underground code of rebellion, a sound imported from America's deep south. Born in pain, but resurrected in passion. And for young British musicians, this wasn't just music, it was freedom. Hold that sound in your head. A distorted guitar crying over a walking bass line, a drum beat that sounds like a street fight. Now add the restless energy of 1960s London. The class divides, the new youth culture, the frustration of a generation that wanted something real. That was the world Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker stepped into. Clapton was already a myth in his 20s. His fans literally painted walls with the words, "Clapton is God." He'd cut his teeth with the Yardbirds, mastering American blues riffs note by note. But when that band chased pop success, Clapton walked away. He didn't want fame, he wanted authenticity. He found it with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, where his guitar became a weapon of emotion. Thick tone, raw bends, solos that told stories. He was Britain's first true guitar hero. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across town, another kind of legend was forming in chaos. Jack Bruce was a classically trained musician from Scotland. He'd studied cello and composition, but his heart belonged to the blues. His playing wasn't ordinary. He treated the bass like a lead instrument. His lines didn't just support the song, they challenged it, danced around it. And his voice? Soulful, fierce, almost operatic. But Jack had a temper, a mind as brilliant as it was volatile. Enter Ginger Baker, a drummer unlike any other in rock at that time. Baker had jazz in his blood. His drumming was complex, fiery, unpredictable, a storm behind the kit. He played like every beat was a battle, every fill a threat. And with Jack Bruce, that threat often became real. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. Before Cream, Bruce and Baker already hated each other. In the Graham Bond organization, their fights were so explosive they sometimes came to blows right on stage. They were two forces that could barely coexist until Clapton came into the picture. By 1966, London's club scene was overflowing with talent. The Who smashing guitars, the Stones perfecting swagger, and a new kind of virtuosity bubbling beneath it all. Musicians were pushing boundaries, but none had yet captured the full power of blues, rock, and improvisation in one explosive sound. That summer, Ginger Baker approached Clapton with an idea to form a new band, one that wasn't about pop hits or safe tours, but about musical chemistry and technical freedom. Clapton was interested, but only on one condition. Jack Bruce had to be the bassist. Baker agreed, reluctantly. And just like that, the fuse was lit. Three men, each brilliant, each volatile, and each carrying a piece of the puzzle that would redefine modern rock. They called themselves Cream because they believed they were the cream of the crop. But no one, not even them, could have predicted what was coming. Hold that image. 1966. London. Three musicians walking into a studio with amps cranked high, a chip on their shoulders, and a dream of freedom in their hands. They were about to take the blues, stretch it to its limits, and blow the doors off what rock music could be. And that's where the legend begins. Because before the world heard Sunshine of Your Love, before the walls of the Royal Albert Hall shook with feedback and fury, there was just a small idea in a city full of noise. A simple question that every young musician was asking. What if we could make it louder, longer, and more alive? When Ginger Baker, Eric Clapton, and Jack Bruce finally stepped into a rehearsal room together in the summer of 1966, something unusual happened. There wasn't a manager watching the clock. There wasn't a record label calculating singles. It was just three musicians testing each other, like predators circling before deciding whether to hunt or fight. The first notes they played weren't polite. It was raw, loud, almost chaotic. But then, suddenly, it started to work. Clapton's guitar roared, Bruce's bass ran up the fretboard like a second lead, and Baker's drums, part jazz, part thunderstorm, crashed around them. It didn't sound like a new band. It sounded like an explosion. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. Most rock groups at that time were built around harmonies, rhythm guitars, and neat, balanced arrangements. Cream threw that out the window. They didn't fill space with more players. They used the space itself. Clapton's tone filled the room, heavy and warm, born from a Gibson SG plugged into a wall of Marshalls. Bruce's bass climbed all over it, answering the guitar instead of hiding beneath it. And Baker's drumming. It wasn't just rhythm. It was a conversation, full of fills, accents, and sudden detours. Freeze the frame for a second. Listen to the sound of three people refusing to take turns. That's what made Cream different. Their early rehearsals felt more like duels than jam sessions. Baker would switch tempos mid-song. Bruce would follow, or sometimes refuse to. Clapton tried to balance both. Out of that tension came a chemistry no one could copy. By the time they played their first gig at the Twisted Wheel Club in Manchester, word had already started to spread. This wasn't just another British blues act. When they released I Feel Free in late 1966, the reaction was instant. The song started with a cappella harmonies, then broke into a galloping rhythm that didn't sound like anyone else on the radio. It was both psychedelic and precise, rooted in blues, but soaring into something entirely new. Pirate radio stations picked it up first. Then the BBC followed. Suddenly, Cream were the talk of the underground. After I Feel Free, the room tilted. The first time they played it live, people stopped talking. It didn't sound like a pop band, it sounded like a weapon. And in a Britain still recovering from post-war conformity, that sound meant rebellion. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, the rest of London's rock scene was watching closely. Bands like The Who and The Kinks were pushing limits, but Cream went further. They didn't just perform songs, they stretched them. A 3-minute track on vinyl became a 15-minute jam on stage. Every night was different. No one, not even the band, knew where a song would end. Fans loved it. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it self-indulgent, too loud, too experimental. But to the kids in the crowd, it was like hearing the future break through the speakers. Numbers don't tell it. The live tapes do. Listen to the ferocity of Spoonful from their early shows. The way Bruce's bass solo melts into Clapton's feedback. The way Baker shifts from a steady beat to full-on percussion chaos. It was structured anarchy. And then the backlash landed. Older blues purists accused them of disrespecting tradition. Some called them too technical, as if emotion and skill couldn't live in the same body. But Cream never apologized for their sound. They knew they were inventing something new. A way for rock musicians to play with the freedom of jazz. That's what made them the first true power trio. 3 musicians with no hierarchy, no background players, just pure electricity. Their shows weren't just concerts, they were experiences. The walls vibrated, the air got thick, and audiences left with ears ringing and minds blown. Even Jimi Hendrix, newly arrived in London, was rumored to have studied their shows in awe. He saw what they were doing and raised the stakes. Hold that image. 3 men on stage, each one trying to outplay the other, yet somehow creating unity through the chaos. That's the paradox of Cream. Constant tension giving birth to pure innovation. By 1967, they had proved something powerful, that a band didn't need layers or safety nets to sound massive. Cream had rewritten the rules. 1 guitar, 1 bass, 1 drum kit. That was enough to change the sound of rock forever. But success only amplified everything: the fame, the exhaustion, and the fights. Because when a group this volatile catches fire, it's only a matter of time before it burns too hot. By 1967, rock was no longer just a sound. It was a movement. The clothes, the colors, the language, everything was changing. London was now the center of that storm. But when Cream released Disraeli Gears, they didn't just join the psychedelic revolution, they defined it. Freeze the frame here. Think about what the world looked like. Swirling tie-dye shirts, paisley jackets, long hair, and a new sense of rebellion that was half spiritual, half chaotic. Young people were turning away from old rules, old wars, and old expectations. Music was becoming a kind of freedom ritual, and Cream gave them the soundtrack. They weren't just selling records, they were selling permission. To be loud, to be weird, to be unapologetically yourself. The title alone, Disraeli Gears, was an inside joke, a misheard phrase about bicycle gears. But it fit perfectly. Absurd, playful, a wink to how fast everything was moving. The band recorded the album in New York with producer Felix Pappalardi, who became the hidden 4th member of Cream. Pappalardi pushed them to expand beyond blues riffs into something far more colorful. He layered harmonies, experimented with echo and tape delay, and helped them turn raw jams into structured psychedelic anthems. And then, out of that wild experimentation, came one of rock's most iconic riffs, Sunshine of Your Love. Simple, heavy, unmistakable. Hold that riff in your mind, that slow, descending groove. It feels almost hypnotic, like a blues chant that's been dipped in acid. It came from Jack Bruce after he watched Jimi Hendrix perform in London. He wanted a riff that would hit just as hard, a loop you could live inside. Clapton matched it with a tone so thick it almost hums like an organ. Solo the guitar, and you'll hear that famous woman tone, a sound Clapton created by rolling back his guitar's treble and cranking the volume. Smooth but aggressive, singing yet sharp. One studio trick you can't unhear after this. That riff was double-tracked. Two guitars playing the same line, slightly out of sync, creating a depth that no one else at the time had. That's the secret weapon. It wasn't just about volume. It was about texture. Meanwhile, Strange Brew took their blues roots and painted them with Technicolor. It was sly, slinky, full of wit. Clapton's vocals were cool and detached, but underneath, Bruce's bass danced like a second melody. Ginger Baker's drums pushed and pulled against the beat. Jazzy, unpredictable, alive. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. Baker never played straight rock. He treated the drum kit like a jazz trio within itself. Hi-hats swinging like ride cymbals, tom fills that answered Bruce's bass runs. If you solo the drums under Tales of Brave Ulysses, you'll hear the trick. The rhythm actually breathes. The cymbals wash like waves, matching the mythic lyrics about ancient voyages and cosmic love. And that's why copycats never quite felt right. You could mimic Clapton's tone or Bruce's lines, but without Baker's heartbeat, the machine fell apart. Culturally, Disraeli Gears dropped right in the middle of the Summer of Love. The album cover, bright, surreal, and overflowing with color, looked like something you'd see in a dream. That art wasn't just packaging, it was identity. It told you what you were about to hear, a band leaving Earth for somewhere new, and kids got it immediately. The songs didn't sound like the smoky blues of London clubs anymore. They sounded like the mind expanding, like sound itself was melting. Tales of Brave Ulysses brought poetry and mythology into rock lyrics, something unheard of for a blues trio. Psychedelic Libre mocked love songs with humor and chaos. We're Going Wrong flipped rhythm completely. Slow, echoing, like a heartbeat fading into space. Freeze the frame again. Look at what Cream had become. They were no longer just musicians. They were icons of a new counterculture. Long coats, colorful scarves, bold prints. Their look was just as defiant as their sound. Parents complained. Critics called it indulgent. But the kids copied everything. The clothes, the attitude, the sound. Behind all the myth and mayhem was the real reason it worked. Craft. Every part of Disraeli Gears is carefully built chaos. Bruce's bass lines act like a second guitar, locking horns with Clapton's solos. Baker's drums aren't background, they're punctuation. And Clapton's guitar tone became the most studied sound in rock for decades. Pull any one of them out, and the magic disappears. That's how tight the balance was. And while the press kept asking if Cream were too loud, too long, too uncommercial, they were unknowingly documenting the birth of modern rock. Because Disraeli Gears wasn't just an album, it was a doorway. The moment when the blues put on Technicolor skin and stepped into the future. Quick reality check. In less than a year, Cream had gone from smoky clubs to international fame. They'd proven that musicianship could sell records, that improvisation could headline festivals, and that three people could sound bigger than an orchestra. But with fame came pressure and cracks. Because behind the vivid lights and thunderous shows, something darker was forming. The music was getting louder, the egos larger, and the chemistry that once made them unstoppable was now tearing them apart. By 1968, Cream had conquered everything they'd set out to do, and more. They weren't just a band anymore. They were a phenomenon. Sold-out shows, radio anthems, magazine covers. To the outside world, they were unstoppable. But inside, the wheels were starting to shake loose. Let's sit with that for a second. Every night, the same three men walked onto a stage in front of thousands of screaming fans. They turned up their amps, looked at each other, and tried to make lightning strike again. But when you're pushing that hard, that often, the sparks eventually burn you. The touring schedule was brutal, a blur of cities, flights, and hotel rooms. They'd finish one arena, grab a few hours of sleep, then hit another. There was no time to breathe, no time to write, and no time to heal. The record label wanted more music, more hits, more everything. The managers wanted bigger venues. The audience wanted louder solos. And Cream delivered. Every time. But behind those roaring shows was silence. The kind that comes from three people who could no longer stand each other. You could hear the tension on their next record. Wheels of Fire. Half studio, half live. It was a split-personality album that perfectly mirrored the band itself. On one side, you had polished, carefully constructed songs like White Room, filled with drama, beauty, and control. On the other, you had raw, explosive performances like Crossroads, captured live. A song that felt like it could collapse at any moment, yet never did. That live version of Crossroads wasn't just a cover, it was a declaration. Clapton's guitar screamed and sang at once. Jack Bruce's bass thundered underneath like a second soloist, and Ginger Baker's drumming tore through the mix with jazz precision and warlike power. Listen closely to that recording. The tempo isn't steady. It breathes. It pushes forward, pulls back, and then explodes again. That's the sound of three men wrestling for control, each one fighting to lead. And it's thrilling, because the chaos is real. But that same chaos that made Cream exciting on stage was destroying them off it. Let's talk about the grind. Hundreds of shows, deafening volume, endless travel. The amplifiers kept getting bigger, the egos louder, the arguments sharper. Bruce and Baker, brilliant, explosive musicians, had a chemistry that worked musically but not personally. On stage, they could read each other's minds. Off stage, they wanted to kill each other. Clapton, stuck between them, started to fade. He wasn't the guitar god type. Not really. He loved the music, not the myth. But the myth had already taken over. Wheels of Fire hit #1, became the first double album to go platinum, and proved Cream could do anything they wanted. But the higher they climbed, the thinner the air got. The fun was gone. The improvisations that once felt free now felt like fights. The audience wanted louder jams. The critics called them self-indulgent. The music that started from passion was now chained to expectation. And then came the breaking point. We're going to slow it down here. By mid-1968, the band could barely speak, without arguing. Baker's drumming was so loud that Clapton and Bruce couldn't hear themselves. Sound engineers tried everything: barriers, monitors, stage setups, but it didn't matter. Cream's live volume had become legendary and unbearable. There's a story that during one show, the band played so loud that the crowd physically backed away from the stage. It wasn't music anymore. It was war. Clapton, drained and disillusioned, started looking toward quieter sounds, toward soul, toward restraint. He'd begun hanging around George Harrison and listening to the band, who played with dynamics and space. Cream, meanwhile, felt trapped in its own noise. They announced their breakup before Wheels of Fire had even finished dominating the charts. Behind the posters, there was a price tag: sleep, sanity, hearing. Years of competition, endless pressure, and the sheer physics of what they created had caught up to them. But here's what's remarkable. They didn't fade away. They detonated. Their final tour in late 1968 was both a victory lap and a funeral march. The crowds were massive. The sound was enormous, but the magic was slipping. The connection that had once made them unstoppable now felt mechanical. They played their final show at the Royal Albert Hall, a fitting end for the world's loudest trio. The cameras rolled, the crowd roared, and for one last time, they tried to hold it together. If you watch that footage, there's something haunting about it. You can see it in their faces, the exhaustion, the distance, the quiet acceptance that it was over. And yet, even in that moment, they were extraordinary. Wheels of Fire became their last true statement as a band, part masterpiece, part warning. It captured the highest highs and the deepest cracks. It showed what happens when brilliance collides with burnout. Cream had achieved in 2 years what most bands spend a lifetime chasing: fame, influence, and immortality. But they paid for it with everything else. Most acts fade into nostalgia. Cream didn't fade. They burned until the engine blew. And that's why the legend stayed frozen young, fierce, untamed, and unfinished. Because in music, sometimes the brightest light leaves the darkest shadow. Every legend leaves an echo, but some echoes never fade. They just evolve. When Cream disbanded in 1968, rock music was still figuring out what it could be. 2 years later, every guitarist wanted to play like Clapton. Every drummer wanted to hit like Ginger Baker. Every bassist wanted the freedom and fearlessness of Jack Bruce. The band may have been gone, but their DNA was already everywhere. Quick reality check. Spot the lineage. Led Zeppelin took Cream's thunder and gave it mythic scale. Deep Purple added the organ and turned the volume even higher. Jimi Hendrix expanded the psychedelic side that Disraeli Gears hinted at. And decades later, bands like Rush, Cream's spiritual heirs, built entire careers on the power trio formula they pioneered. Cream had shown what 3 people could do when they refused to play small. They stripped the music to its core. No rhythm guitarist, no gimmicks, no safety net, just chemistry, volume, and vision. Hold that sound in your head. The pulse of sunshine of your love. The fierce interplay of Crossroads. The eerie beauty of White Room. Now fast forward to the 1970s. Then the 1980s. Everywhere you turn, their fingerprints are still there. In Zeppelin's swagger, in Hendrix's tone, in the structure of every rock jam band that followed. Even metal, that juggernaut genre, owes something to Cream. The heaviness, the riff-driven attack, the on-stage improvisation. Without Cream, the conversation between power and precision in rock might never have happened. But this story isn't just about influence. It's about endurance. Decades after their breakup, people still talk about them with a kind of reverence. Reissues of Fresh Cream, Disraeli Gears, and Wheels of Fire continue to find new listeners. Each generation rediscovers the same shock. How did three people make that sound? And in 2005, nearly 40 years after their split, Cream reunited for a short run at the Royal Albert Hall, the same venue where they'd said goodbye. Fans from around the world flew in to see it, not because of nostalgia, but because their music had become timeless. No lasers, no tricks, no dancers. Just three men, older now, playing as if the decades in between were only a long exhale. The chemistry was still there, maybe quieter, but still burning. One sample you've heard 1,000 times. Clapton's tone from Sunshine of Your Love. That thick, woman-tone sound became the holy grail for guitarists everywhere. It showed up in blues, in hard rock, even in hip-hop samples. And Ginger Baker's drumming? You can hear its jazz roots echo in progressive rock, in fusion, even in modern drummers who may not even realize they're channeling him. That's what real legacy sounds like. Not imitation, but inspiration. So why does Cream still matter in 2025? Because we live in an era where music is endless, but connection is rare. Cream reminds us what happens when musicians listen to each other like their lives depend on it. Their songs weren't polished to perfection. They were alive. Messy, loud, unpredictable, but real. In a world of algorithms and auto-tune, that raw honesty feels almost rebellious. If you're new to Cream, start with Disraeli Gears. Let Sunshine of Your Love hit you first. That riff still feels like the moment rock realized its own power. Then dive into Wheels of Fire. Hear what happens when genius collides with exhaustion. And if you want to hear the moment it all came together, listen to Crossroads. Live. That's not just a performance, it's a lightning strike. Before Cream, rock was loud but polite. After Cream, it was alive, fierce, improvised, and unapologetic. Even artists who've never heard the name are living in their echo. Every time a trio steps on stage and turns a small idea into something earth-shaking. That's Cream's legacy at work. They changed the rulebook. They proved that three musicians, perfectly in sync, could shake the world. If you were there, you already knew. If you weren't, now you do. So now it's your turn. What was the first Cream song that hit you in the chest? Or maybe, what band carried that same energy for you? Drop it in the comments. We'll add your pick to the pinned playlist. This is Rock Lore, where we keep the untold stories of music alive. Subscribe so these legends don't get buried by the algorithm. And hit the next episode, where we trace how a single riff from the late 60s set off the chain reaction that created Led Zeppelin. Because the echo of Cream never really stopped, it just keeps changing shape. The journey doesn't end here, rock warrior. Watch this next.